Oh, hey guys, what's poppin'? I'm just over here chilling. Yeah, you know, I'm just vibing over here. Nothing out of the ordinary. Oh, that? Yeah, I'm just having withdrawal symptoms. You know, it's almost been 4 years. It's getting up there without a new chapter of Deltarune, and honestly, I'm fiending. And you know what one of my withdrawal symptoms is making a really, really long video, probably the longest video I've ever made, all about Deltarune. So, basically, what I'm proposing is that we already have Deltarune all figured out. Now, let me explain. Deltarune fans have been starved for so long that we have created so many theories and speculations so broad and so varied that one of them has to be right. For example, just think about how it went in Chapter 1. We predicted that the Darkners were created from real-life objects way before we had confirmation in Chapter 2. And you know what the saying goes? 1 million truck freaks running on a Google Doc. One will eventually write the entirety of the Azzy Pants fan fiction. Or was it 1 million monkeys on a typewriter? One will eventually write Shakespeare. I don't know, I forget. But since it's been so long, why don't I just highlight some key lore and mysteries many of these theories that we'll be talking about today will cover. And just like every Deltarune theory that we've had so far, how can I not have this video have a theory sona? So let me just quickly transform real quick. Much better. All right, let's get started. So, Deltarune is a game by Toby Fox. Okay, yeah, no duh. But this game is apparently the game that Toby has always wanted to make, even all the way before Undertale released. He had this fever dream of a video game ending that inspired him to create this game in the first place. And even Undertale was more so a test run to see if he had the capabilities to make a game in the first place so that he can create Deltarune. I mean, Undertale and Deltarune are anagrams of each other. Both feature the same characters, some changed up more so compared to others. However, the big difference of Deltarune is that our choices don't matter. Sparing or fighting enemies lead to the same conclusion overall. And Toby Fox even states that the game will have only one ending. Or at least that's what we thought, because Toby then had to put a big fat question mark on that statement, which just sort of complicates everything. But anyway, a very short summary of the game for those who need a little bit of a refresher. Deltarune is all about our protagonist Kris finding a mysterious place known as the Dark World along with their bully churned buddy Susie. In this dark world, real world objects from the room that the Dark World was created in will be given life and personality. These people are called Darkners, and the people that don't come from a dark world and come from hometown are called Lightners. One of the first Darkners that we meet, named Ralsei, speaks of a legend of 3 heroes coming at Earth's edge to banish the angels' heaven. One a human, one a monster, and one a prince of the dark. Ultimately, we're here to seal the fountains in each and every dark world to close them up in order to prevent a thing known as the Roaring. It's an event that's basically the end of the world, where these gigantic titans appear and the world is covered in darkness. However, if you couldn't guess already, that short little plot overview is just the tip of the iceberg of what is actually happening. And you could probably guess that a game made by Toby Fox is not gonna be that simple. So we got a lot to cover before we start getting into the meat, the bones, the theories. So why don't we start off with our characters? Why don't we start off with the easiest character to understand by far in the main group, Susie J. Deltarune. Full name not yet disclosed. Susie is apparently the new girl in hometown. However, to our knowledge, we don't know what town she originally came from, and we have no idea where Susie even lives in hometown. But with some subtle dialogue hinting that she doesn't have her own room, the fact that she mostly eats inedible items like chalk, and the fact that she absolutely calls nobody when told to call her parents, it's heavily implied that her home life is not a good one. Other than that, Susie is a character that seems to be able to override the player's decision. decision, going against dialogue options, choosing to go with Ralsei instead of letting the player choose who to accompany, and when we are put into her perspective, we are unable to control her, and she can even start battles outside of our control. Now, do I think that this ability to go against the player is a super heavily plot relevant important ability that is going to be tied to the meta narrative? No, not really. However, I do believe that this could keep coming up later to help drive the plot in an interesting way. Like how Susie being able to go against our choices led to us being separated from Ralsei and Susie, that later made Noelle a viable party option. But other than that, Susie is a brash and bold character with a heart of gold, and showcases that even the most simplest of Toby Fox characters still can have some sort of complexity and depth. Ralsei, the signature fluffy boy, and the first Darkner that we meet. And he's definitely the most weirdest Darkner that we meet. He seems to have been isolated his whole life, but still knows Susie and Kris's names before they even introduce themselves. He tells us about the legend of the Deltarune, but excludes the part about the world-ending event called the Roaring, right before Berdly is about to create a fountain that could possibly cause that. He shames Susie for using violence in Chapter 1, but is perfectly fine when the player or Kris does the exact same thing. He can seemingly teleport to other dark fountains and knows about the locations and rooms in the light world. He can sometimes take the player's perspective away from Kris and onto Susie and says something off screen to Kris that we have no knowledge about. Oh, but when he can't do that special ability and has no idea what happened on Susie's end, he suddenly freaks out like something has went off script. His name is an anagram of Azrael, like what the fuck is up with that? And finally, he knows what the goddamn Z button is on your keyboard when none of the other characters have any idea of what he's talking about. Basically, what this all boils down to is that Ralsei is very sus. Alright, I can't. I'm sorry. It's an old meme. It's a dead meme. I apologize so much. Overall, just something to keep an eye out is what is going on with Ralsei, because this is just too many things to be absolutely a coincidence or just nothing. Noelle, the girl next door that has a big fat crush on Susie. And no, that's not a mystery or theory, that's just basically fact. Noelle seems just like a regular girl on the outside, but the deeper you look into her character, the weirder that she seems in comparison to every other character in Deltarune. She seems to have this strange obsession with things that scare her, and seems to be a key in finding glitches and breaking video games. Like, she was able to somehow meet this mysterious Eggman through cat petters, and was able to connect with Spamton through the very same cat petters game as well. The fact that she is known for breaking video games and is a video game character in herself just spells out that it's going to be very plot relevant in the future. And lastly, and certainly not least, she is the sole reason that we have the well, we'll save that topic for later. Berdly. Berdly is a gamer. Moving on. Kris Dreamer. So Kris is the character that we play as. Or is it? Kris is such an interesting character and flips the perspective of silent protagonists right on its head. Sort of like how Toby flipped the idea of EXP and RPG battles on its head in Undertale. From what we know about Kris before the game of Deltarune, Kris is a little bit of a prankster and someone who likes to tell tall tales that scare their friends for fun. They have a deep connection to their adopted brother Azrael and puts him on a pedestal inside of their own mind. And Kris is someone that doesn't usually talk a lot and decides to express themselves usually through the act of playing their piano. They seem to have a love for knives and for chocolate. However, not everything is good in their life. They seem to be the only human in this hometown and seem to get very uncomfortable when humans are mentioned. Kris was adopted into the Dreamer family, one that had precious memories in the past, but is right now in a very rocky spot. With Toriel and Asgore divorced and Azrael away to college, it seems like Kris is in the most isolated time of their life. And not to mention that their childhood friend that they used to share these very fond memories with, they have now grown distant from them, being Noelle. And all this goes to show is just that Kris had a life, before we came into the picture. A life that we have now sort of taken control over. When you move Kris around or pick different dialogue options for them or interact with various objects, it's completely against their will. The only time that Kris actually has control over their own body is when they rip out their own soul, making their body more limp in the process. And since they need the soul in order to properly function, the thought of severing the connection permanently with the soul and what it means for them as a person is very disturbing to Kris. They had a very emotional reaction to seeing a very similar thing happen to Spamton after his fight. But Kris seemingly has some sort of plan, because while outside of our control, they plug back the TV, stages a sleepover with Susie by slashing the tires of their mother's car, and even after the warning from Ralsei about the roaring, they still decide to create a dark fountain anyway. You could say the sort of gimmick of Deltarune is its player and protagonist connection. And right now we're just in the build-up of this connection and relationship, and eventually it will reach its climax. A climax that I believe will cement Deltarune as a masterpiece. Des, or full name December Holiday, is someone that we know next to nothing about. What we do know is that Des is Noelle's big sister and someone who grew up alongside Kris and Azriel. However, due to some unknown circumstance, she is no longer in the lives of the people that she cared about the most. We know that Noelle is actively searching for Des, judging from the room that Queen makes based off of her search results. And we know that Noelle is desperate enough to get any sort of information about Des, that she'll even accept spam emails just to try to find any information possible. But the weird thing is that Noelle seems to be the only one actively looking for Des. Everyone else in Hometown speaks about her in a past tense, and no active search attempts are being made currently by anyone else. However, one thing that we do know about her actual disappearance is that it was done by unnatural means, showcased from the various websites from the Spamton sweepstakes, calling us to find her. Is she maybe the person that reaches out to us through Spamton's weird dialogue, or are they the person talking to us in the code? It's really honestly hard to say. The whole situation with Des and her disappearance seems to be very important to Deltarune, but at the same time, something that's not super important. Hey, yo, Gaster, my man, welcome back, buddy. You had barely any relevance in Undertale, and now you're coming to Deltarune with full swings. Gaster is a very interesting figure in all of Toby Fox's games so far, which is Undertale and Deltarune. And even though his first appearance was in Undertale, it seems that his main role in the story that Toby Fox is setting up is in Deltarune. I mean, he was the one to recount the legend on the Deltarune website, and Entry 17 seems to be related to Dark Worlds in general. Gosh, he's even the one to tweet publicly about the release of Deltarune, giving us the survey program. If you want to know every single thing that's related to Gaster in both games, I would recommend watching Misty Sparkles videos on everything about Gaster. It's a super popular video and every single Deltarune theory recommends it, but honestly it's for a good reason because it's just such a well-made video. So I will leave a link in the description along to any other videos and theories that I recommend, so please go check them out after you're done watching this video. But I will note for now some of the key highlights about Gaster that are important to the theories that we'll be talking about in a later section. So we essentially know that Gaster is the one that created the survey program where we play Deltarune in the first place. He's also the one that talks us through the entire Goner Maker, the character selection creation screen thingy. He also has control over all of our save files, and his just favorite noise of smile.ogg is played not only in Entry 17, but in both the Dark World when you use your phone inside of one, and is also played very slow down by 666% when you're right next to the bunker. And I know that this might be considered a theory technically, but it's just like so obvious that it might as well just be canon at this point. But Gaster seems to have been the one to directly influence the secret bosses, basically becoming the reason why they went insane and have some sort of secret knowledge that other Darkners just don't have. We can correlate this because both Jevil and Spamton met a strange someone, and in Spamton's case, that strange someone used the phone to talk to them, and when an Addison went up to the phone receiver that Spamton was apparently calling this person on, on, he described it as garbage noise, which, like I said earlier, is the same garbage noise that is described when you use your phone in the Dark World, which is the same noise as Entry 17. Boom, Gaster influences secret bosses. And currently, right now, we don't know the full role of Gaster in the story, but it's definitely gonna be something very, very interesting. Alright, now I just want to preface this section by saying it was so interesting to see the online discussion of this route when it was first discovered. People didn't believe it at first or assume it was some sort of fan creepypasta when people were talking about what actually happened. And I believe that that was the impression that Toby Fox was trying to go for when creating this route. The Werid Route is supposed to be this route that is fundamentally wrong and something that breaks the game in a way that should never happen. And so far, the Werid Route can only really happen with Noelle's help by the use of her special Ice Shock ability, which creates a loop around where enemies can't run from battle anymore because they become frozen instead. And by going on the Werid Route, you make Noelle stronger and stronger, and you choose specific dialogue options that make Noelle take and solve things in the most brute force of methods. And the route just has an air of just themes of a toxic relationship. Like, you have to pick a dialogue option that says you and Noelle are something other than friends. And when looking at the picture of the Ferris wheel, you have to say that Noelle will ride the Ferris wheel with us. And not to mention that you need to get stronger and stronger rings to fulfill the requirements of unleashing the most devastating spell that Noelle knows to end the Werid Route. It just paints an overall theme of uncomfortability. And after unleashing this devastating spell that's called Snowgrave, which the description of the spell says is fatal, right on to our friend Berdly, Noelle leaves us. And everything seems to go on track, but everything is just a little bit off. The mansion has been taken over by Spamton, and there are no fun side encounters or characters that we usually see in the regular route. It's just a straight way all the way to the end, doing the bare minimum of what is necessary to get us right to the end of the chapter. And instead of letting Ralsei take us on his little shifting perspective magic thing, we just sit. And Ralsei seems unusually disturbed by not knowing what happened with Susie and Noelle, almost like it was off script. We don't even get a queen fight, we just end things as our party members leave us to seal the fountain alone. And as we go to seal the fountain, it grants us the appearance of the one, the only, the big shot, Spamton G. Spamton. And of course, since Neo is known for its unlimited defense, that means the road ahead of us seems impossible. So with little left to do, Kris calls out to both Susie and Ralsei as much as they can, but it's only when us, the player, whispers Noelle's name does she respond immediately and take out Spamton once and for all. When everyone goes back to the light world, Berdly is unmoving and doesn't respond. His face is just planted right on the desk, almost like a corpse. This clearly states to the player that what we do in the dark world to people that we know has real permanent effects on the light world. However, everyone's reaction to what has happened and what is going on is so abnormally normal. And everything seems to go exactly as it did in the regular route, or at least you initially think so. Because the only thing that's different in the light world in the Werid Route is when you go to interact with Noelle in the hospital. She's more aggressive in taking control over a video game and questions whether the dark world truly was a dream and if that haunting voice calling to her was real or not. And after exploring Hometown, everything seems to end exactly the same. Because even though Kris went through that traumatizing and horrible experience in the Werid Route, they still decide to create another dark fountain in their very own house. So even though Deltarune's whole theme and motto is that your choices don't matter, it seems like this route is something that goes against that very statement, which has us questioning how much of the game will change in this route, or will everything be abnormally normal even after we still commit these heinous choices. Alright, now how could I forget the heart, the soul, the big shot of Deltarune? Spamton G. Spamton. And yes, Spamton gets his own section in the video. So Spamton, he's unironically my favorite character that Toby Fox has ever made, so let's just get right into him. Spamton is a Darkner in the Cyber City section of Deltarune, and clearly when you first meet him, something is very off about him. He seems to speak in this weird text that I think everyone has just collectively agreed is just jumbled up audio commercials. But this man is not right. He lashes out and punches at a dumpster can, which obviously disturbs Kris. And Spamton is just someone who seems very desperate. This eventually leads into a battle with Spamton where you can have a little Spamton heal you. Something that I don't think has happened in any other fight is have a miniature version of the character you're fighting heal you. But the whole point of this battle is to establish a deal with Spamton and Kris, and he asks them to go to the trash zone alone. If you follow Spamton's instructions, you're able to go inside of his shop. And I want to note that his shop has his own theme, which is not too common in Deltarune. I mean, the only other shop that has his own theme is like Sham Shop, which sort of makes sense because it seems very plot relevant in the future. But other than like Spamton Shop and Sham Shop, every other shop just has the hip shop theme. I mean, I guess if we count Sweet Captain Cakes and KK whatever, but like, do we really count him? Like, come on. But Spamton having his own general theme for his shop just goes to show that something is off about him in general. But by talking to Spamton in his shop, you get to learn of a character named Mike, someone who is seemingly related to the TV, and Spamton considers a dear friend. And by talking to Spamton just a little bit more, he gives you this key gem and wants you to go to the basement in the Queen's mansion and use this unusual disc on this strange machine in the basement. And once you take the key gem and the disc, Spamton's shop is closed forever. And this sequence is just so eerie on a first playthrough. Having the monochrome black and white with just nothing going on left a very heavy impression on me with the first time I played. And by doing exactly what we said, we go to the mansion, we find the basement, and we see this weird little image right before the teacup section. In the files, it's called image_friend, and it depicts a yellow and pink-eyed creature smiling at you. And yes, that's the only word that I can use to describe this thing. It is a creature. Is it related to Spamton at all? I don't know. It has the pink and yellow glasses or eyes or something, but it's just very weird. But anyway, you insert the disc into this old machine in the mansion, and surprisingly, nothing seems to happen. So you walk your way out until you are greeted by Spamton Neo, which clearly is a reference to Mettaton Neo. And even though Spamton is most certainly more powerful in this state, he is still bound by these wires, these strings. He is not truly free. He needs more power. And so he calls out to you, Kris, the person that made the deal with him in the first place. He asks for your soul. And this choice of word is interesting because not only does he refer to it as a soul, but before he said heart-shaped object when talking about Kris's soul. So something must have changed when he went into Neo. But luckily for us and Kris, Susie and Ralsei come in right at the nick of time, and we're able to enter one of the best fights in Deltarune, the Spamton Neo fight. This fight reintroduces the yellow soul and gives us an ability to fire a big shot, and is accompanied by one of the best bangers in the Deltarune soundtrack of all time, which not only combines the melody of just Mettaton Neo, but also Dummy, the world revolving, or the freedom motif as people online like to call it, and Spamton's original Now's Your Chance to Be from before. And one important theme about this fight that I want to note is important to Spamton's character is that this is one of the few fights that Toby Fox has created where one of the boss's attacks has a chance to just do absolutely nothing. The only other occurrence of this I can think of is Napstablook in his boss fight in Undertale. However, the difference between that attack and Spamton's is that Spamton is constantly trying. He is pushing himself to the absolute max, fighting for his life, fighting for his freedom, but still he falls down. He stumbles, he crumbles, and he can't seem to get anything right. And to even prove this point further, when Toby saw an exploit that players were doing with this fight, where you can just spam the big shot, instead of removing it or fixing it, he just made it into a feature. And instead, Spamton now gets angry when you're using this, making his attacks do a lot more damage. Even after Chapter 2 came out, Toby Fox is still adding ways to make Spamton fall short, even after he is giving it his absolute all. And eventually, when you do finish this fight, and cut Spamton's strings, he crumbles to the ground, lifeless and unresponsive, and cuts to us talking to Spamton one last time, tied and bound to the wall. The freedom that he so desired only led to him becoming even more trapped than he ever was before. And realizing this, Spamton cuts all the big talk, removes the goofy attitude and commercial cut-ins, and just seems to speak regularly and truthfully to us, choosing to instead become an item for the fun gang and hopefully be able to see them break their own strings and achieve their own freedom. This encounter afterward with Spamton shakes Kris somewhat to their core. Spamton was a showcase of what could happen to Kris if they decided to cut the strings of the player. All that awaits is them being alone, trapped, and unresponsive. It's one of the few times in the regular route that not everything is a fantasy in the Dark World. And if you go back to the trash zone, you'll see the Addisons hanging around the area right before Spamton's shop. And by talking to them, you'll get Spamton's backstory. He was someone who wanted to be a big shot, but could never make it in the scene, constantly coming up short. That is until one day he started getting these phone calls from a mysterious person. With their help, he was able to reach new heights, and he became big. He had his own room in the Queen's mansion, and had big posters all around the city. But eventually that person stopped calling Spamton, and Spamton lost it all. He would keep trying to call this person time and time again, but they never responded. And eventually, one of the Addisons decided to check up on Spamton, and all he saw was a hanging receiver on the end of a phone line that Spamton seemed to have left. And by putting that phone up to the Addison's ear, all he could hear was garbage noise. The same noise that is heard in entry 17, the one written entirely by Wingding's Gaster. Spamton is a character that when presented with the theme of your choices not mattering in this world, he tries to gain the power to escape the bounds. To prove to those that have wronged him in the past, and those who look down on him, that he can be a big shot all on his own. But no matter how hard he fights, he always falls up short. And at the end of the day, he's left living in a goddamn dumpster can. Spamton also, in the Snowgrave route, is one that even sells you the Thorn Ring, the ring that allows Noelle to even cast Snowgrave in the first place. He's seen hiding in a trash can, counting down the number of enemies that you got left before he can give you the ring. And I like to believe that the reason that Spamton hides in the trash can in the Werid Route is because he knows somewhat about the game mechanics, and that you can't hurt him while he's not visible, hiding away in some sort of dumpster. Sort of similar to how Gerson, in the Genocide route of Undertale, knew that the player couldn't hurt him at all because he was a shop character. But after the Werid Route continues, Spamton seizes the opportunity of chaos that is unfolding to take control of the Queen Mansion. He makes it into his own image, reclaiming the thing that he has once lost. However, when Kris is all alone to seal the fountain, Spamton uses that opportunity to attack, trying to defend the fountain with Spamton's new Neo body using the iconic Neo defense, which is the opposite of what happens in Undertale's Genocide route with the actual Neo body. But I would like to believe that Spamton didn't use this sort of feature in the original route because he sort of saw that fight as them helping Spamton. He was cutting them of his strings, improving his new body. They weren't actually trying to harm him in any serious way. However, not even the Werid Route, when he pulls out all the stops, can he succeed, because after calling to Noelle, the power that Spamton gave her is now used against him, and he is defeated once and for all. Now, if you talk to Swatch in the mansion on the regular route, he says that he helped create the Neo body with a Lightner, and that it being a Lightner's dream is the reason why it has so much power. And you know, since all Darkners are real-world objects, or in this case, like real-world softwares, it's pretty much evident that Swatch is like the MS Paint program of the Deltarune universe, and that Metaton, the ghosty Metaton from Deltarune, used this to draw an image of their ideal body. And I like to believe that the reason why the body is like stashed away in the basement is because Metaton, likely embarrassed of this drawing, put it into the computer's recycling bin, which is what I like to believe that the Queen's Mansion basement sort of represents. And of course, the last and sort of kind of big important thing with Spamton to talk about is the Spamton Sweepstakes charity event that Toby Fox hosted with Fangamer. And I'll just go down some of the important information that we got from the sweepstakes. Of course, I talked about it before, but we got the cat petter story with Spamton, the Peepus, and this weird egg that Noelle got. We got teasers for Chapter 3 of Deltarune featuring this green room. We got to see these weathermen people that we now know as La Niño and El Niña. We got a new enemy, which is apparently named the Shadow Men, and we got this outfit for Susie and Kris, depicting them in a cowboy costume. Of course, like I said earlier, we got the Find Her page, which depicts this weird guitar and is obviously linking to Des, because the actual website is called December. And when you just put in Des, you get this weird 404 page that's obviously fake. We also get one of the pages that has this weird image of a chair with a tab reading, "What if it gets darker than dark?" And upon clicking it, it goes all weird and bubbly. And the last important thing that I'll mention from the sweepstakes is we get this message from Spamton, who seems to condemn a person named Tenna with an image of a TV crossed out at the top. And he says that everyone needs to pay, everyone except Mike. And the name, either Mike or Tenna, will be our antagonists for Chapter 3's TV Dark World that's coming up. And that's mostly everything on Spamton. He's surprisingly a lot more important than what he initially seemed at first, and seems to worm his way into the most interesting parts of Deltarune, which I absolutely love. The Knight, or the Roaring Knight, is a figure in Deltarune that has been apparently creating the dark fountains of both chapters 1 and 2. Even though they seem to be the creator of these dark fountains, the darkners that live in them don't even seem to know what the Knight actually looks like. And they also seem to just interpret their actions as sort of fitting their own narrative. We can also sort of glean that the Knight isn't opening the dark fountains to cause the roaring, at least not right now. And yeah, I know what you're saying. They're called the Roaring Knight. Obviously they want to cause the roaring, right? But like, if they did, wouldn't they just be opening dark fountains like left and right every other minute to cause the roaring? And to our knowledge right now, we still have no idea who the Knight actually is. Don't worry, we will get to that. We will, trust me. But overall, the Knight is just so vague, and we have so little clues to go off of, that basically anyone in Hometown could be this infamous Roaring Knight. The Angel. The Angel is a figure depicted in the actual Deltarune, and not like the game Deltarune, but the actual symbol that the game is named after, which is also called the Deltarune, but in this case it has a space in between the words Delta and Rune. And this word for Deltarune not only just means the symbol, but also the legend that is tied into the symbol, which the Angel also is depicted in the exact same legend. In the actual legend itself, it states that at World's End, 3 heroes will arise to banish the Angel's heaven. However, the Angel also seems to be this figure that is tied to Hometown's religion, sort of being a stand-in for God or Jesus in Christianity and our real world religion. The word angel is also heavily thrown around a lot in the dialogue of this game, so much to the point where it's just sort of unusual, and a lot of this dialogue sort of relates to Noelle in some way or another. That's basically the gist of what we know about the actual Angel itself, and all we do know is that at the end of Deltarune, if the legend is true, we will have to one day confront the Angel and banish their heaven. The meta-narrative. Oh my god, I did not know this word existed before Undertale and Deltarune came out, but let's talk about it. So people widely believe that Deltarune will have a meta-narrative equivalent of that to Undertale. Undertale's whole meta-narrative was how simple RPG gameplay mechanics like saving and reloading and the power of choice and curiosity is somewhat a godlike power to those in the actual video game themselves. And that sort of tied into a narrative of morality into our choices of video games and what it means for the actual characters in that video game. And Undertale clearly defines this meta-narrative right in the first encounter that you have in Undertale. It's part of the whole marketing of the game itself. Deltarune, on the other hand, has only really dipped its toes within anything that's a meta-narrative. I mean, obviously we have Gaster using therealworldtwitter.com to contact us. And of course, we also have the Werid Route exploiting a sort of glitch to its absolute limits. But Deltarune's sort of whole thing is a game about your choices not mattering. A clear defiance of what Undertale's whole point was. So it's a little bit tricky if Deltarune will really define a strong meta narrative within itself, like how Undertale did, or if it's simply going against Undertale to showcase that it just has a straightforward narrative to tell. And for my personal opinion, I honestly see the Werid Route being the route where the meta narrative exclusively takes place in. Either way, it's really unsure of now, but we do have some hints hinting at some sort of meta narrative that we could have in the game. I know it's been insert time here, amount of minutes, and now we're only finally getting to the theories. Sorry, I just had to recap all the mysteries and stuff that we have about Deltarune before we talk about the actual theories that go into those mysteries. With so many theories and so many Deltarune fans being brain rotted by having no new substantial content, I think it's only fair that at least one of these theories has a good chance of being right. So let's go by each theory one by one and see which theory I believe is right on the money, as well as some honorable mentions. And I just want to give a preface to all this. This is the insane ramblings of a madman that is so dried up for content that he has done this video. So what I pick from these theories might be way off from the actual truth, but it's just overall fun to talk about. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Character-specific theories. All right, yes, let's talk about the character theories that we have so far. I'm not gonna go through every single character, but just the ones that I think are most important right now. T theory. All right, how can I not talk about character theories without mentioning T theory? This is a theory that covers basically every single main party member in Deltarune and their relationship with one another. This theory was made and popularized by Fenrick, so if you wanna get more information about this, I highly recommend checking their video covering this. So in Deltarune Chapter 2, you can purchase tea from this one Addison in the Cyber City. Each tea that you get represents a different character that you can have in your party, and each of the tea heals a different amount of HP when you use a certain tea on a certain character. They also have different dialogue texts come up when they drink a specific tea. In essence, the whole theory is that depending on the amount healed and what the person says in the dialogue is representative of how the person who drinks it feels towards that person that the tea is made from. So, for example, in a normal playthrough, you can't really get Noelle to drink Susie tea. However, in the game's files, if she were to drink Susie tea, she would heal 400 HP, saying, "I wonder if they sell this in gallons." Since Noelle has like a huge crush on Susie, it would make sense that Susie tea would heal her a crazy absurd amount, showcasing the crush that she has on Susie through the amount of HP healed and the dialogue. And when characters drink their own tea, they heal very little and comment on how it just tastes like nothing or like water. So by taking all that into account, we can sort of determine how each party member feels about each other in Chapter 2. So for Susie, she heals 120 HP from everyone except herself and really enjoys everyone's tea. Since Susie doesn't really have many friends and everyone in the party are sort of like her first friends, it makes sense that she would heal so much from everyone, seeing that she views them pretty highly. Now, Ralsei is a very similar case to Susie, healing the same 120 HP when drinking Kris or Susie tea. The only outlier though is Noelle tea, which heals a flat 50 HP. This sort of makes sense since Ralsei and Noelle don't really know each other. Noelle also, when drinking Ralsei tea, even says there's nothing in here, implying that they have no relationship. And speaking of Noelle, when she drinks Kris's tea, she heals a flat 70 HP and says that tastes like cinnamon. What is this aftertaste? The aftertaste that she is talking about is representative of the player controlling Kris. And the reason why Noelle doesn't heal that much HP in comparison to like Susie or what Ralsei heals when they drink Kris and Susie tea is because even though Noelle and Kris are childhood friends, they have sort of grown distant in present times and don't really have as strong as a bond as they used to. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, we have Kris and their tea. The highest that Kris heals from anybody's tea is is Susie, healing a whopping 120. This implies that Susie is kind of Kris's closest friend that they have currently, and that they really value Susie as a person. The second highest T is Noelle, healing 70 HP, which is probably for the same reasons why I said before about when Noelle drinks Kris's tea. And lastly, and this time leastly, we have Ralsei tea, which only heals 60 HP. Only 10 HP higher than when Ralsei drinks Noelle tea when they're complete strangers, which sort of implies that Kris doesn't have the highest opinion of Ralsei. Kris sort of only views them slightly higher than a stranger. So in all those times that you're making Kris hug Ralsei or saying all these things that compliment Ralsei, Kris is 100% not okay and is not comfortable with you doing that. T theory is just such a strong theory that it just might as well be canon at this point, and I can clearly say that this is definitely what Toby Fox intended with the use of the character T. Now on to Susie's big theory. The one theory that I hear everyone talking about, and might as well just be canon at this point, is that Susie has a bad home life. Either she has bad parents living in hometown, or she is homeless and ran away from home. This is for the reasons why I explained earlier in the Susie section. She doesn't seem to call her parents at all when asked to, and she also just drinks alleyway milk from Alphys. It just doesn't really paint a picture of a stable and healthy home life. And I think the big whole reason of this is because it will play into a theme of escapism and relate to how Susie finds escapism in the Dark Worlds. And this whole reality could be shattered for her because she still currently thinks of the Dark Worlds as being completely real in the Light World, when that's just not the case. So when she finds out that the Darkners that she's been hanging out with and making friends with are just objects, I feel like it could really mess her up. A couple of honorable mentions for Susie Theories that I personally like is that Susie came from a human village theory, and that Susie will fight the party theory. With the human village one, I could see it being very plausible. It would make sense as to why Susie doesn't really fit in hometown, because the town really only has monsters in it. And it would also explain why Susie makes so many references to bleeding when monsters clearly don't bleed in the Undertale and Deltarune universe. And on the subject of Susie fighting the party, we already have a battle theme for her already in chapter 1, and Susie finding out that Kris is being controlled by us, she could act in a very similar way as to when she fought Lancer. And also with the whole Werid Route existing, I don't think Susie will be very happy with finding out of what we've done, and that could very well lead to a confrontation, most likely in an actual fight. Overall, we got a simple character in Susie, and we got simple theories. And personally, I love it. I love Susie, and I can't wait to see what she has next. Ralsei Theories. So, the big theory with Ralsei is that he's evil, and I don't entirely believe that. Now, the theory that I do believe in is that he has some sort of interaction with Gaster. This explains why he simply knows about the player, and his unusual knowledge of game mechanics, like where the TP bar is, or what the Z button is on our keyboard. It also can explain why Ralsei can easily change the perspective of the player towards Susie, using that time to talk to Kris alone because they got this information from Gaster. Perhaps Gaster is even trying to have Ralsei be this sort of script follower for the crew and have the party follow the legend to a T, which explains why he sort of freaks out in the Werid Route when things don't go exactly as planned. And it just sort of explains why he knows Kris and Susie's names before they even introduce themselves. Another theory that I just want to talk about in this section is the inexistent freedom theory. I believe that this theory is popularized by Jaru J, which you should go check out his channel for some of the most fun Deltarune theories out there. But essentially, the inexistent freedom theory is a response to those affected by Gaster to the idea that their world is fake or that their choices don't matter. You know, Spamton responds by trying to obtain power enough to free himself so that he can make the choices he wants, while Jevil sort of treats this as a game. Everything is fake, so he can do whatever he wants. So if Ralsei is like Spamton and Jevil and was influenced by Gaster, I believe that Ralsei's response to this is to just accept that your choices don't matter and try to make the best of it. Even if your world is fake or your choices don't matter, you can still find some sort of meaning with the bonds that you create, which explains why Ralsei puts so much emphasis on his connection to Kris and Susie, as well as why Ralsei tells Kris that their choices are important in a game where your choices don't matter. Alright, Kris. The one theory that I believe is right on the money about Kris is that we control Kris because Kris at some point went into the bunker and got mixed up in some sort of experiment by Gaster. Monster Teen and Snowy comment on Kris being scared of the bunker in Chapter 2, which implies that Kris went into the bunker before and found something very scary inside. And since the bunker plays a slowed-down version of Entry 17's garbled noise by 666%, it proves that the bunker has some relation to Gaster. So if we keep going along the lines of this theory, it would imply that the opening sequence with Gaster, the one where you create your own character in the Goner Maker, was interrupted by Kris. That mysterious person that talks to us at the end of the sequence would be Kris. And maybe the reason why Kris says you can't choose who to be in this world not only reflects their character not fitting into Hometown, but the fact that the player is controlling Kris is because of some sort of accident. Because just like an accident, it's something completely out of our control. Now, does this mean that Kris was being experimented on by Gaster? No, I don't really think so. I think Kris somehow went to the bunker, stumbled upon his device that allowed us to connect to Deltarune in the first place, and had an accident happen where now we control Kris instead of the vessel that was intended to us in the first place. And could even explain why Kris has been acting weird and seemingly under our control even before the game even arrives. You know, they have the bird cage and its description text says it's been smashed a couple times, implying that they've done this before, but the first time we see them do this is in Chapter 1 of Deltarune. So maybe our connection with Kris wasn't fully stable at first in the beginning because of this bunker accident. And even though we weren't really playing Deltarune, Kris was still having trouble controlling themselves and their soul in the time before we actually became fully connected to Kris. And yes, alright, the theory that involves Kris the most, that I'll go more into later, trust me, okay, is that Kris is the Knight. And I will be explaining that more in the actual Knight section of the theories. But the one thing that I want to talk about from this is that Kris sort of planned the Chapter 3 Dark Fountain. This is not even a theory, this is just canon. Kris turned on the TV in between Chapters 1 and 2, ate the pie so that Toriel would have to make another one with Susie, slashed the car's tires to enforce a sleepover with Susie, and have Toriel call the police and unlock the door so the police can be brought into the dark world. Either way, Kris is definitely planning something, and I hope to find more about their character very soon because this is one of the most intriguing parts of Deltarune as a game.
Get a load of this!
The Strange Eggman. The fact that he's called Eggman, I believe, is a reference to Sonic by Toby, but that's not the actual theory that I want to discuss right now. I believe, with the sentiment and the theory, that the Eggman is just an Easter egg. He literally gives you eggs, which I believe is Toby's way of poking fun at the whole Easter egg idea in video games. The eggs themselves are described as not too important, but not too unimportant, which I believe also plays into the whole Easter egg idea, because that's exactly what an Easter egg in a video game is. And I believe the reason why the game just keeps the track of the eggs is that if you find every one, you'll have like a joke scene in the game towards the end. Similar to like the dog treasure from Undertale. I mean, Temmie is the one keeping track of the egg count. If that doesn't imply some sort of joke in the future, I don't know what does. The other big theory with the Eggman, one that I don't personally subscribe to, by the way, that's your cue to hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying the video so far. You know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But anyway, I don't subscribe to this theory at all, but it's the theory that the Eggman is Gaster, which just goes into the territory of we meet a person that we don't know the appearance of, and they're kind of weird, so it must be Gaster. But if the Eggman was Gaster, it calls into question the whole not too important, not too unimportant Because even though not everyone is a truck freak for Deltarune like me and many others, Toby still knows how important Gaster would be to the Undertale and Deltarune fanbase. So saying he's not too important and not too unimportant just kind of goes against his whole point. And to sort of close off this section, which is somewhat tied into this, I want to explain and introduce the mysterious Valentine's letter that we got in the Deltarune newsletter. It's from a mysterious person that we don't know, and obviously that means that again, people think this is Gaster, but I believe it's more likely to be the Eggman than Gaster. Let me read it to you, okay? It's a strange letter. It's more or less completely illegible, but if you squint your eyes and you squint your heart, for some reason you feel you could understand it. Well, Happy New Year! Or is it the old year? Well, in any case, how is Deltarune? As you are waiting patiently, the time is going around. There was even a rumor of a Valentine's Day. How absurd. Every day is a day of love. If only you believe it so. Do you believe it so? So, the purpose of the message. I want to help. Yes, there was someone I wanted to help. I seem to have forgotten who. Yes, it's quite ironic, but I seem to have forgotten. Was it myself? No, well, perhaps. Regardless, when I see them, I'm certain I will know it straight away. I never forget someone I don't remember. Will you help me? You are very odd for responding out loud to a letter, but you seem reliable. I will be counting on you. Now, put on your coat and wash your face. Or, put on your face and wash your coat. Not necessarily in that order, or in any order at all. Goodbye. There were sounds of someone walking away, and the letter was gone. This letter is just too goofy sounding to be any sort of dialogue that we've gotten from Gaster, and even though it's completely in uppercase, it doesn't really match his speech patterns at all. So very unlikely that it's Gaster. And I'll bring up this letter again in a later section, but for now, those are my thoughts on this Eggman. Alright, so for this section of the video, I want to start first with the honorable mentions, before we get into what I believe is right. The first honorable mention that I want to bring up is Gaster Knight Theory. Now, my original thought of this theory is to completely dismiss it. Anybody that we don't know, that is kind of weird, and we don't know the appearance of, is automatically assumed to be Gaster. However, after you think about it a little more, it does make some sort of sense. Gaster is the sort of game master of Deltarune. He gives us the survey program to even play Deltarune in the first place. He walks us through the Goner Maker and summons us to the game right off the bat. He even manages the save files of Deltarune. So, it would make a lot of sense that he would want to create these dark fountains in the first place for us, trying to provide us with a player experience. Because if you had no dark worlds, you wouldn't really have an interesting game to play. And if you go back to the Ralsei theory that I talked about before, that he actually met Gaster, it likely means that Gaster made up the legend, which would explain why his motivation isn't just trying to make a ton of dark fountains, but to follow a story and guideline that he himself made. The area where this sort of falls apart is that Gaster, in order for this to make sense, would have to have created the dark fountains remotely. Because obviously seeing a strange scientist man walking around a school or a library and having nobody in hometown notice is very unlikely. But other than that one flaw, this theory is very compelling and has really good thematic theming to it. Now, the next honorable mention that I want to bring up is Kris Knight. And I know what you're saying. Kris has, and Kris does. So why is... Okay, I get it! Now, obviously, the biggest piece of evidence for this theory is that Kris literally opens a dark fountain at the end of chapter 2. And another big piece of evidence that I feel like is not really talked about too much when people discuss this theory is that Kris being the knight is exactly what Toby Fox wants us to think at the end of chapter 2. Everybody's initial reaction to seeing Kris open up the dark fountain is that Kris is the knight. Trust me, I would know, because I recently just played chapter 2 with my friend Luke, who has never played chapter 2 before, but has somehow played chapter 1 when it first came out. And when he saw that ending, he turned to me in 180 degrees, looked me straight dead in the eyes and said, "Dude, Kris is the knight?" And of course, there is some other evidence that backs this up. Kris literally wears a night outfit in the Dark World. It wouldn't be strange to see Kris at either the library or the school. And Kris seemingly already planned the Dark World of Chapter 3. However, this theory does have a couple of problems. The appearance of the Chapter 2 Dark Fountain makes it seem like it was created the same day that we discovered it. But we kind of control Kris during the day of Chapter 2, so there's really no way that they could have made the Chapter 2 Dark Fountain. And I know some people say that Kris could have done it in the night after Chapter 1, but Kris is shambling around like a zombie without their soul, so to have them go all the way to the library, which, might I add, is most likely locked at night, open the fountain, and come back to their house without any hiccups, is kind of stretching things a little bit, I feel like. Personally, what I believe makes the most sense is that in between chapters 1 and 2, Kris simply took their knife, ate the pie, and plugged in the TV. But the fact still remains that Kris is 100% guaranteed to be the creator of the Chapter 3 Dark World. And no, I don't believe in gas leak theory. And so if I'm supposed to believe that there is just one singular night, it makes it seem like the Chapter 3 Dark World is a Dark World that's off script of what should be usually going on. Or perhaps of there being just one singular night. There is multiple night theory, baby, made by Cammy Boy G. Go check out the absolute amazing 2 videos he did creating this theory and covering it if you want some more details. It has some really amazing stuff. But anyway, the gist of it goes that instead of there being just one night, there is in fact a different night for every single Dark World that we see. And that the night is simply just a title given to those that actually create a Dark Fountain. It would explain why the title Roaring Night is only brought up in Chapter 2 and not in Chapter 1, and would explain Sham's dialogue when they're talking about the night, saying, and I quote, "A strange night appeared." By saying a night, it implies that there could be more than one. It also explains why many different characters are called knights or are related to knights, like Susie in the flavor text of the equip menu being called the Dark Knight initially, and Kris wearing knight armor, and Berdly also kind of wearing knight armor, almost opening a dark fountain. So if we have a knight for each chapter, then who is the knight of each dark world? Well, in Cammy's theory, he says that we have Albin for Chapter 1 for Card Castle, Miss Boom the Librarian for Chapter 2's Fountain, Kris for Chapters 3, of course, Susie for Chapter 4, Asgore for Chapter 5, Burger Pants for Chapter 6, and finally for Chapter 7 we have Noelle Holiday. Now I do think that some of these night predictions by Cammy are more likely than others. For example, Miss Boom being Chapter 2's Fountain is a little weak in my opinion. I don't think that that's entirely plausible. The fact that she would be called the Roaring Night, and since Queen doesn't know what the Roaring is, but knows about the Roaring Night, it kind of implies that the Night of Chapter 2 would know about the Roaring. And I don't really think that Miss Boom is likely to know about the Roaring, unless like Gerson before he died knew about Dark Worlds or something and told her about it, which is sort of possible. And for Burger Pants, many of you are saying, that must be one that he also doesn't think is likely, but I actually do really like the idea of Burger Pants. He is one of the few characters to get a talking sprite when he didn't have one in Undertale, and seems to be more relevant than ever with the appearance of like Icy heavily in Deltarune. The only other really knight that I think is like less likely in Cammy's original proposal is Asgore. My personal opinion for the Undertale characters that we have in Deltarune right now is that they won't be too important compared to Undertale, at least when it comes to the main cast. Now, for characters like Burger Pants, who wasn't really used too much in Undertale, I can see him having a bigger spotlight in Deltarune. But for someone like Asgore to have a big role as being like the creator of a dark fountain just sort of feels weird to me after he already had such a big role in Undertale. This is exactly the same reason why I don't believe in Papyrus Knight theory at all. Papyrus was such a huge character in Undertale that I think his appearance in Deltarune will be very minor. But I mean, that's sort of the beauty of this multi-night theory. You can kind of substitute the characters with what you believe in to be more likely. Like, let me just add my own little personal flair for this. this, but I feel like it's more likely that Gerson is actually the creator of the Chapter 1's Dark Fountain, and that Alvin is actually the creator of Chapter 2's Fountain. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Gerson is dead. So perhaps before he died, he created a dark fountain inside of his classroom. It's theorized that Gerson might have been to a dark world before, with, in Undertale, his heavy association with the actual Deltarune symbol, and his bench in Deltarune stating that he got inspiration from dreams, which is not only what the dark worlds are thought to be like, but are heavily related to dreams. And Alvin being Chapter 2's Fountain's Knight would make a little bit more sense. And with his interaction in Chapter 2, with Alvin questioning the use of his father's hammer, it would make more sense if that just happened with him creating the fountain. And I don't even think that Alvin had to have gotten the knowledge of the Auroran or Dark Worlds in general from Gerson directly, but perhaps he got it through his books, The Lord of the Hammer. And he was able to interpret the books of methods of how to create a dark world, as well as the prophecy and legend. Now, for Chapter 5's fountain, I could honestly see the mayor, or Noelle's mom, opening the fountain instead of Asgore. She's a new character to Deltarune, and she has much of a reason to create a dark fountain as Noelle does. You know, with the whole having a sick husband and having a missing daughter. Plus, we know that she is very controlling in personality based off of Noelle's interaction with Queen, so maybe creating a dark world is her way of sort of regaining control of her own life. I also want to throw out the possibility that maybe Gaster made the pure dark fountain in the supply closet where Ralsei comes from. I feel it would make the most sense, since it has different properties and appearance when in comparison to other dark fountains. So it would only make sense that it would be created by Gaster, who has been experimenting with dark fountains. But with all the other knight candidates that Cammy brings up, I totally believe in. And if you want more information on why he thinks those knights will be those knights, then I recommend watching the video, and I'll have links to those in the description. And this theory could be easily proved in Chapter 3. If the TV Darkners call the creator of their fountain the Knight, then it pretty strongly points towards Kris Knight or multi-knight theory. So who is the angel? The two big theories are player angel theory and Noelle angel theory. So let's dive into the former first, player angel theory. So the legend goes that 3 heroes will banish the angel's heaven. The player angel theory states that if the player is the angel, their heaven would of course be playing the game of Deltarune, which means more dark fountains and the continual control over Kris. Obviously, this outcome is not the best for the characters in Deltarune. The openings of dark fountains could lead to the roaring, and us controlling Kris is something that goes completely against Kris's will. So, to banish the angel's heaven, which would lead to an overall good to the characters in Deltarune, it would mean that we would have to sever our connection to the game that was established in the first place. Other than that, the religion in Deltarune depicts the angel as this omnipresent force that watches over the characters of the game, which heavily describes the player in retrospect to the game of Deltarune. And the whole player angel theory could heavily tie into the meta-narrative that Deltarune is trying to showcase. However, the angel theory that I believe the most in is Noelle angel. So does this mean that Noelle is the actual literal figure of Hometown's religion? No. However, in relation to the legend, Noelle will be the angel whose heaven that we have to banish. There are a ton of connections relating the angel or the idea of an angel to Noelle. Her and Des make an angel doll in Rudy's room. When talking to Susie, she imagines growing big angel wings. And in the dark world, she wears an angel robe. And finally, my goat, Spamton G. Spamton, refers to her as an angel in the Werid Route. Noelle's importance to the narrative is so great that it's sort of weird that she's not mentioned in the prophecy at all. But if we change the viewpoint that we have the heroes and then we have the angel, Noelle, then it starts to make a lot more sense. And personally for me, I believe in Cammy Boy G's interpretation of what Noelle's heaven will be, and that she will create a dark world that will be the catalyst to the roaring, and that it will be the heaven that we will have to banish by sealing the dark fountain. And that is what I believe is the angel. The future of the game. So the future of the game honestly kind of hard to predict, at least where we are now in a 7-chapter story, since we're only at chapter 2 out of 7. But what chapter 2 introduced to us that's very important, that separates pre-chapter 2 theories to post-chapter 2 theories, is now we have a pattern. In chapter 2, Toby has established a pattern of going to dark worlds, finding the secret boss, and then the introduction of a big bad for each dark world are now set in stone for future chapters to come. And the important thing that comes with a pattern is a theme. So let's break down some of the parts of the future and predict what could come next. There are so many different theories trying to predict which location will have a dark world, but the big determiner that people use is that they must have those iconic double doors. Is that a rule set in stone by Toby Fox? No, I don't really think so, but it is funny that the computer lab didn't have double doors in chapter 1, and then suddenly in chapter 2 it has double doors. But let's go by each chapter by chapter and find out what I think is most likely to be a dark world location. And maybe we can predict a little bit of what happens in each chapter as well. Now obviously for chapter 3 we have the TV world, and I'll go into more about my predictions of what will happen in that chapter very soon, but first let's talk about chapter 4. So for chapter 4, I heavily believe that the church will be a dark world. I can see the Dreamer family going to church with Susie, and when Kris and Susie go to explore the church off on their own, they find those mysterious double doors that leads into the church's dark fountain. The only image of chapter 4 that we have that takes place in the dark world is of this little red cup darkener guy. So maybe the actual dark world takes place in the church's party supplies room. You know, where they keep all their little decorations, plates, and cups when the church has special events or parties. We also have the Dark Mantle item, and the Dark Mantle in the files is an item that is resistant to electric and holy attacks. And the church just sort of screams holy enemies and darkness, so it just makes sense that chapter 4's dark world will be at the church. Now for chapter 5. I can see it being focused on the festival, and as much as it would be a cool idea that the dark world is just out in the open, I feel like it'll be in a building. And since I sort of predicted that the mayor will be the knight of chapter 5, I could see one of two possible locations, being either the mayor's office or the holiday house. I feel like the mayor's office could be a cooler location, but the holiday's house seems more easily accessible to Kris and Susie, so I'll lean more towards the mayor's office just because it's unique. Either way, Noelle will be involved heavily in this chapter, and I can see us getting full display of Noelle tackling the problems with her mom head on. Now for chapter 6, like I said, I agree with Cammy's take, and I think that this dark fountain will be Burger Pants' dark fountain and will take place in Ice-E's pizzeria. With the heavy relevance of Ice-E, it just makes sense that we would have a dark world in the pizzeria, and honestly, I could see the big darkener antagonist of this dark world just being Ice-E himself, which could be really fun and somewhat creepy if done well. Not to mention, Ice-E kind of already appears in a dark world. He is literally in the cyber world dark fountain multiple times. So maybe this is some foreshadowing on Toby's part. Lastly, I believe that Noelle will make her dark fountain in the hospital in chapter 7. And like I'll keep saying, I agree with Cammy's interpretation, with it being very inspired by video games, and it could be a whole Dragon Blazers dark world. Toby could really dive into the meta narrative with this dark world, and I can see the secret boss for this dark world to be a silent protagonist from Dragon Blazers. A complete mirror to Kris, being controlled entirely by another entity, being without emotions and being completely unresponsive. This fountain, I believe, will cause the roaring and will be one the fun gang will have to seal in order to save the world. And finally, this will be the last time that I take something from Cammy's multi-night theory, but I think that we will have a different final dark fountain in the Werid Route. And this fountain just has to be the bunker. And I could see it being very similar to the true lab in Undertale, where darkeners are sort of formed from failed experiments. This could be the section of where we learned what happened to Kris when they went into the bunker, and possibly find out where Des is. Now, I know that in the files of the game, we have text saying chapters 8, 9, and 10, but honestly, I don't believe we'll have any chapters past chapter 7. If I had to give the text a purpose, I believe that it'll be some sort of ending scenario that leads into the true ending, one where the game keeps continuing without the input of the player. The story and the characters live on, but the player's connection doesn't, hence why we have text for chapters 8, 9, and 10. Now let's predict the ending of Deltarune! Or maybe not, because I don't have a whole lot to say about the ending of Deltarune. Even though I said that we predicted everything in Deltarune in the title of this video, I feel like this is the one thing we can't predict. The ending of this game came to Toby in a fever dream, which really puts everything and nothing on the table at the same time. And for me personally, I'm excited to see what it is. Deciding to create a game just because you had a dream must mean it was one hell of a dream. The only thing that I will say about the ending is that there will only be one ending that we get for the game. I truly believe that Toby was telling the truth when he said that there would only be one ending, and he got all of the different endings that he wanted to make in Undertale. Now, does that mean that none of our actions will change the story in any way? No, I don't think so. We already have major and minor hints in the story saying that what we do actually does have an effect, like the Werid Route and the various different sparing and violence options found within the game. So I could see the Werid Route having the exact same ending as the regular route, just the context of how we got there is very different. And that's kind of everything I have to say on the ending of Deltarune. But now that we've talked about the ending, let's talk about the beginning of chapter 3. So, Chapter 3 will obviously take place inside of the TV Dark World. It will obviously have an antagonist of the Dark World, along with a secret boss. We already know some of the Darkners that we'll meet, like the Shadow Man and El Nino and La Nina being the weather reporter type characters. And it's already a guarantee that Toriel will be in the Dark World along with Ralsei. So there has to be an interaction with them at some point in this chapter. I know that some people theorize that they'll miss each other or something like that, but to me that just sounds very lame. Having a character heavily resemble another character's son and having them not interact when they're literally in the same place is just a huge waste for potential character interaction and lore. And that's why I believe that both Toriel's interaction with Ralsei and the Dark World being in the Dreamer house, it'll lend to us getting a lot more information on the Dreamer's family's past and their family relations. And lastly, we will at least have one police officer show up in the Dark World. Since Toriel called the police and the door is unlocked, one of them has to be present. Personally, I like the idea that both Napstablook and Undyne come into the Dark World, but if I had to just pick one, I would say Napstablook. This is because we already know Undyne's character really well, and giving Napstablook more spotlight in this game than Undertale makes a lot of sense. However, what I haven't heard too much in the community is having the mayor show up in this Dark World. The mayor, or Noelle's mom, is a very controlling person and very capable in Hometown. She's so capable, in fact, that she even does most of the police's jobs and is the reason why there is so little crime in Hometown, if there is any to begin with. She's even the person that usually deals with the crime head on when there even is one. Like, she's the one that caught the Wet-Nosed Bandits in Chapter 2 in the first place. So having her deal with the case of the slashed tires would make a lot of sense to me. And if she does appear in the Dark World, I don't think she'll appear until around the end of the chapter. I feel like her appearance in general would be sort of a mood killer and make everything more serious. So getting all the goofy stuff out of the way and having her appear and having a more serious moment at the end makes a lot of sense. And this ties in together with my personal night theory take, cause this is where she'll learn how to create a dark fountain in the first place. And that's essentially all my predictions for main plots of chapter 3. We got Mike and Tenna. One will most likely be an antagonist of the Dark World in Chapter 3, and the other is believed to be the secret boss. Now, I don't believe in either Mike or Tenna being a secret boss of Chapter 3. Secret bosses are, well, you know, supposed to be a secret, so giving us the name of one feels like it kind of defeats the purpose. So you might be saying, then who is going to be antagonist of Chapter 3? We gotta have one of them. But I say, why not both? And I feel like this would be a good opportunity to bring up chess theory, since we are talking about a future chapter antagonist. The gist of the theory goes that each chapter's Dark World antagonist will be representative of a chess piece in the game of chess, and it will descend in the order of value that piece has in the game. So obviously first we have King, who is the most valuable piece in chess, then Queen, then Rook, Bishop, Knight, and Pawn. Now, I know what you're saying. That's only 6 pieces, but we have 7 chapters at least. Well, the theory goes that the final antagonist in Chapter 7 will be the actual player of the chess game, so either Gaster or the Angel. Chess theory as a whole is just a really fun theory, and has some merit. Like the fact that Queen, a laptop, is just named Queen is kind of weird in comparison to Toby Fox's other major characters. However, I don't entirely believe in chess theory, and that it'll follow this strictly to each piece of the board. But one aspect that I'll indulge in chess theory that many don't seem to bring up is the fact that after King and Queen, many of the pieces in the actual game have more than one. And typically in chess, you have 2 rooks. So what if instead of just either being Mike or Tenna for Chapter 3's antagonist, you have both play an antagonist role? Notice how I said antagonist and not evil? So for this final thing of this section, of the Mike and Tenna section, let me indulge you into my own little personal theory that I have for Mike and Tenna. You know, I can't just talk about other people's theories forever. I have to throw my own hat into the ring as well. So Tenna. Tenna is obviously going to be related to a TV antenna, which implies that they'll have a very powerful position in the Dark World, being able to literally control the broadcasting of TV shows and TV channels is what an antenna does. And since we already know that the characters in the Dark World, their Darkners, will be based off of TV channels like El Niño and La Niña, it means that Tenna could literally be able to control the other Darkners, and like how Queen does in Chapter 2. And then we have Mike, who is clearly in reference to a microphone. And typically, what do you need in order to actually record a show on TV is a microphone. So what if Mike is being used by Tenna to help broadcast their power over the TV Dark World? This would explain why Spamton views everyone in the TV Dark World in a negative light, except for Mike. Mike, just like Spamton, is someone that is trapped. So when Spamton is finally able to break free in the Big Shot boss fight, he calls out to his friend Mike one last time, hoping that one day he too can break free of his controller's strings. And this is something off script, but I just wanted to mention it anyway. For my headcanon of Mike, I think he is someone who just does not talk. He has others speak through him, you know, like a microphone. And maybe that goes into why Spamton hates everyone else, is because Mike is clearly trapped, but nobody seems to notice it because he can't actually say anything about it. And that's my theory for Mike and Tenna. And honestly, I feel like it would be really fun to make Tenna just completely evil. Having a completely evil antagonist, similar to how King was before he became more sillier, would be really refreshing and something I feel like we need more, especially coming out of the more comedic Chapter 2. And yes, I can't wait to be proven wrong in the next couple of days. So, we got the secret boss of Chapter 3. How can I not talk about the Chapter 3 secret boss without mentioning Woody Theory? Even if it's far-fetched and way out there, it's still so fun to talk about. I'll give the basic rundown, but please go check out SpookyDood's videos on this theory for more information, since, you know, he is the one who made it, and I'll have that linked in the description as well. But basically, Woody Theory is that in the Deltarune newsletter discussing the canceling of the cowboy section from Chapter 3, Toby seemingly used strange pieces of dialogue, saying that it's in danger of being canceled, and that's just how cowboy shows go, I guess. And Toby, around this time that the newsletter came out, was posting this fan-made creepypasta audio of "You got a friend in me" from Toy Story on Tumblr. And Woody from Toy Story is a character from a canceled Western TV show in the actual Toy Story universe. So what if that newsletter was a hint at the secret boss of Chapter 3, being a washed up canceled Western TV show character, in heavy reference to Woody from Toy Story? Hence why he was posting about Friend Inside Me audios from Tumblr. So do I think Woody theory is definitely possible? No, not really. But I think that the secret boss being a canceled TV show genre archetype is really solid, and I can see it being plausible. Like, for example, instead of a Western, it's a black and white film noir type character. We already have the Shadow Men that look like they could come out of some sort of genre tied into that, as well as like gangster mob TV shows and movies. We've already seen secret bosses be tied into basic darkners that are found in the dark world, like the playing cards for Jevil and the Addisons for Spamton. So the Shadow Men could just tie into our more film noir guy, who I believe could be more of a detective type character rather than going the mob gangster route that the Shadow Men go into. And to end off this Chapter 3 Secret Boss section, I want to bring it back to that Secret Valentine's Day newsletter that we got from before. What if instead of Gaster or the Eggman, it's actually the secret boss of Chapter 3? I mean, we already have La Nina and El Nina as Valentine's Day card options you could get, so Chapter 3 characters aren't off the table. And the secret bosses having knowledge most don't makes sense. So, some of them knowing about the Deltarune isn't too far-fetched. And yes, I am talking about the legend of Deltarune and not the game itself, because there is a space in between Delta and Rune, and that does matter. That's how you can tell that I have been brain rotted so hard. I just personally feel like this is more likely than Gaster or even the Eggman. Say it's just my gut instinct, cause I don't really know if Toby would really be willing to give us dialogue from the Eggman. I feel like it's more in his nature to just keep him silent forever. But that's what I gotta say about the secret boss of Chapter 3. The future of the Werid Route. The Werid Route will be this genocide route in Deltarune. Well, yes and no. The fact that it's even called the Werid Route states that this route is one that goes off script rather than the murderer merchant route of Undertale. And I believe in the theory that Noelle is the only way to achieve more progress on the Werid Route. Her knack for breaking video games and being a video game character is what allows us to go into the Werid Route in the first place. So for example, in Chapter 3, since it's pretty clear that Noelle won't be in that chapter, I don't think we'll be able to progress the Werid Route at all in Chapter 3. And maybe this is slightly a reach, but like I just thought of this while typing this, but maybe that's why Kris still creates the Dark Fountain even after the Werid Route. It's to ensure that the next Dark World we go into won't have Noelle in it, so the player gets less incentive to want to continue the Werid Route since they're not going to be able to have that constant control over Noelle. However, if you couldn't tell, I don't believe at all in the Toriel being a Werid Route character in Chapter 3 theory, or even that she'll be a party member. Having a different party member for every chapter just seems sort of bloated to me. And I believe that we already have met and have had all the party members in our party that we'll have in the game, period. But anyway, whether we have Noelle or not in Chapter 3's Dark World, the Werid Route will still have an effect on the narrative moving forward. It's kind of hard to keep a dying Berdly inside the computer lab forever without someone doing something about it. But like I said before, I believe that this route is not completely just genocide like in Undertale, and I could see us doing other things instead of just ice shocking enemies in order to progress this route. Something very similar to Noelle's blog post about her finding an unused door in Dragon Blazer's weird maze could be possible in the Werid Route as well. Perhaps a similar section will come up, just as she described, usually having a character that will guide us through the maze on the regular route, but in the Werid Route they never show up. And unlike Noelle, who couldn't open the door at the end of the maze, with our new power, whatever this door is or whatever happens in the Werid Route could lead us to finding more clues about Des, and this could strengthen Noelle's resolve to get stronger with us. Even though she is terrified at what she's done and what she's going to do because of our manipulation, she's still willing to do it anyway because it's in order to find her lost sister. And of course, because of our horrible actions in the Werid Route, it'll eventually lead to our friends in the Dark World and the Light World trying to stop us and going against us. I believe in the theory that Susie will have a fight with us in the normal route when she discovers that Kris is being controlled by us. And in the Werid Route, I could see this fight be most likely where we'll commit another Snowgrave. Or honestly, I could see Jockington also being another Snowgrave option. He is like a side character that is not too important, but not too unimportant, just like Berdly. But either way, this Snowgrave action will be witnessed by Ralsei and will probably cause him to leave the party. It's already been foreshadowed with Dragon Blazers that the mage will leave the party. And who is the mage in Deltarune? Obviously Ralsei. And just like Sans in the Genocide Route, I feel like we will fight Ralsei in the Werid Route, and it will be the big climactic battle. Perhaps using the power of a shadow crystal, or perhaps multiple shadow crystals, causes Ralsei's power to increase dramatically, giving us one of the hardest fights in the game. But eventually after he's defeated, a new Dark World will open up, the one in the bunker that I talked about earlier. This Dark World will be the one that caused the roaring. This Dark World is not going to be a typical one that we're used to seeing. It'll be very similar to the one in the supply closet where we met Ralsei for the first time. It will be dark, alone, cold, and uneventful. It will just be giving you straight facts and answers to the secrets that the fan base have so dearly craved. That, of course, being information on Gaster and what happened to Des, and any sort of meta-narrative little mysteries that we were still wondering about. But like I said, it'll be uneventful, cold, and not fun in the slightest. I highly doubt that Toby Fox would reward a player for committing these crimes against his characters with any exclusive cool moments like a Gaster fight or a fun and unique Dark World to end off the Werid Route in. However, at the end of this bunker fountain, the exact same events will happen at the end of this route, just like how it did on the regular one. Same ending, but entirely different concepts and circumstances that led to it, thus giving us the one true ending that Toby Fox has stated many times before. But essentially, that's what I've got for the Werid Route, and thank you for listening to my fanfiction on the Werid Route. What is the big point of Gaster in Deltarune? I believe that the big point of Gaster is to be the connection from us, the player, to the game of Deltarune. He created the survey program for us to originally play Deltarune in the first place. And Gaster's big experiment that he fell into is a Dark World. The same noise in Entry 17 plays when he uses a cell phone in the Dark World. This noise isn't just Gaster's noise, but a noise associated with Dark Worlds in general. Now you might be saying, well, how come when we go to the Dark World we don't shatter into time and space like how Gaster did, if that's what you're saying? Thus his creation can't be a Dark World. And I bring you to the layers of Dark Theory, very similar to the layers of Fiction Theory made by FrutiShade, but slightly tweaked by me. So let's begin. One website that we found in the Spamton sweepstakes is this page with the chair. When we click on it, it gets darker and starts bubbling unnaturally. And the text on the title of the page says, "What if it can get darker than dark?" Dark worlds in nature are representative of themes of fiction, being the fact that dark worlds themselves, by some power, are giving non-living things life and constructing a whole story around them based on light world activities. It sounds a lot like creating fiction from inspirations from your real world. And something that I noticed in chapter 2 is when Berdly tries to create a dark world. And one big thing is obviously sticking out to me here in this sequence. Can you guess what it is? It's the fact that Berdly doesn't have nipples. No, obviously not. It's the fact that he's able to create a dark fountain within a dark world. It's quickly brushed off because of the warning that Ralsei gives about the roaring, but this shows to me that this is possible within Deltarune, and that leaves so many questions that I need answered. Like, what happens to the Darkners in the cyber world if a dark fountain is created in their dark world? What would the dark world resemble, and what objects would this dark world use in creation of its own dark world? And you might be thinking, alright, that's interesting, but how does this relate to Gaster at all? Well, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, what if I told you that this is how Gaster got scattered across time and space? Each dark world takes from the area around him, so continuing to create more and more dark worlds inside already existing ones can distort and warp the dark world and the Darkners and people inside of it. Like that Spamton sweepstakes says, what if it could get darker than dark? A layer of darkness so dark that the continuous fiction of the dark worlds eventually loop around to the non-fiction of reality, which would explain Gaster's ability to connect to the highest layer of non-fiction possible, being us as the players, and his ability to interact with Darkners like Spamton and Jevil without really needing to be present within the dark world itself is because he is so deep within the layers of darkness. This could even explain how Des went missing in the first place. She might be in a layer of darkness so deep that she's gone from reality. Not so deep that she transfers over to non-fiction like Gaster, but deep enough as to where she is completely lost, stuck within the game's code. A layer of dark so deep that she can't feel or even see anything. She can only hear the slight scratching coming from somewhere. Phew! Alright, so that's my theory about what's going on with Gaster. I believe it explains a lot about what his whole deal is, and I think it overall ties into the point of his character. He is here to go into this meta-narrative description of the layers of fiction, and also here to provide us a controlled experience of Deltarune. The last thing that I want to talk about in this Gaster section is the theory of there being another Gaster. Every single Undertale character has a counterpart in Deltarune, whether they be different or the exact same. So logically, it would only make sense that there would be a Deltarune equivalent to Gaster in Deltarune. The biggest piece of evidence supporting this theory is the name of the first song in the Deltarune OST, Another Hymn. This song plays when we are going through the Goner Maker that is being currently controlled by Gaster. Gaster's themes in the files of Undertale is called his theme, and Gaster throughout the files and dialogue in Undertale is referred to as him. So the reason the song is called Another Hymn is because this is another Gaster, Deltarune's version of Gaster. This could explain why Gaster can speak in normal text to us rather than the winged things that he's so heavily associated with in Undertale, and could allow us to actually see him as a character. But that could go with either theory. I believe that we will be able to see Gaster in Deltarune either way. However, I believe that his appearance will look completely different than the Mystery Man sprite that's been being used for him for so long. After all, that was only a single part of him, not the entire thing. So, the meta-narrative. The big point that Deltarune has to say. We already have the themes of your choices not mattering and fiction versus reality, not to mention the whole statement that Toby is trying to make with the player and player character, and the importance of secrets within the game of Deltarune will also play a role as well. So let's start with the one that Toby is hinting towards the most, the player and player character connection. Kris is seemingly a player character that didn't choose to become one, and us the player didn't choose to play as Kris. Our relationship with Kris is entirely toxic by nature. Just as Kris needs us to be able to function properly, we need Kris in order to play the game. However, this relationship that we have and that is continuing to be maintained is against both Kris's and the player's will. And I think that this relationship will tie back into the vessel, and the vessel will eventually come back and make a clear statement about this theme. I mean, the data for the vessel is saved within the game files of Deltarune. I do like the idea that we'll get to play as the vessel at some point, but I feel like that goes against what the game is trying to tell us, being that our choices don't matter. And I don't believe that the vessel will have some super grand important role in the game that ties into the actual core narrative of Deltarune. And I also don't believe it'll have any sort of boss fight or anything like that. However, what I do feel like it represents is a discarded experiment. One that brings uncomfort and worry at just their appearance alone. And having the vessel just appear could be a catalyst into the climax of our relationship with Kris. This relationship with Kris will eventually have to become broken. I believe most likely at the end of the game, choosing to have our connection be severed so that Kris can be able to live a normal life. However, that brings us to our next topic, being that your choices don't matter. I believe in SpookyDood's interpretation and theory, delving into the potential meta-narrative of Deltarune with his Devil's Heaven video, which is that Deltarune is a story about fate and how it can affect the player and the characters within the actual game itself. The prophecy and legend are some of the first things that we get to know about in Deltarune. Susie initially directly opposes this fate, trying to go against the nature of being a hero, until she eventually listens to us and becomes one. Ralsei's whole point in the game is to guide the heroes, Kris and Susie, towards the destined fate of the legend. Spamton and Jevil as characters are basically given knowledge of the future, predicting future encounters and characters because they have forbidden knowledge of this future fate that eventually drives them mad. The end of every Dark World leads to the same outcome, the sealing of the fountain and moving on to another day to seal another fountain. Yeah, sure, there are some things in Deltarune that we can change, but the overall story is not affected in any meaningful way. That is, until you play the Werid Route. And I believe that the Werid Route is in direct opposition to Deltarune's fate. Like how I explained before in the Werid Route section, the Werid Route will definitely have significant changes compared to the main story. However, I do still believe that the Werid Route will ultimately have the same ending. As hard as you might try to defy the fate and break the game fundamentally, at the very end, the ending will still be the same. You cannot escape the fate. I feel like this theming of fate will be sort of similar to how Undertale explored choices within a video game. If you played a game in which no matter what you did, the outcome would always be the same, would you still be able to enjoy the game? And this might be a weird comparison, but I could see this concept of fate being tackled very similarly to how Attack on Titan handled its final season. If you don't want any spoilers, you can skip to this time. But anyway, Eren is a character who is bound by his own fate, someone that can constantly see the present, past, and future all at once. Everything that he experiences in the present isn't new to him because he's seen it all before. Any attempts to try to resist the future outcome only leads to him following the same set path anyway. And because of this, Eren is miserable. He is someone who has lost all control over their life. So how does this exactly relate to Deltarune? I feel like where AOT took fate into a more depressing view, Deltarune will have a more positive view about fate. Even if your fate is determined, you just want to enjoy the ride, make memories with those on your journey, and enjoy it for what it is and move on. And I believe that this will tie into the meta-narrative around secrets, and I believe that Toby will have a lot to say about the secrets in video games in general. To those that crave secrets and want to find a way to defy fate, you'll only be left with cold and empty facts. The bonds, the memories that you had in this game are being repeated over and over again, making you numb to all emotion behind every scene. This is all so that you can discover every single thing about the game, dissecting the game for what it is fundamentally. The Werid Route exists for these people. You manipulate Noelle because you want to see the secrets that she brings. At any time in the Werid Route, you can cancel it so many times and go back to normal. But no, you follow the set path, choosing the coldest dialogue options to progress. And eventually what you're left with is the destruction of bonds you could have had. And at the end, you will find your secrets, but you will be left empty. Now knowing the answers that you longed for so much, you'll lose on the emotional attachments of the characters in the world that you once enjoyed. Your experiments will be completed, but your humanity will be gone. You will find yourself feeling the exact same way as W.D. Gaster. Just as Flowey was a parallel in Undertale to how cruel a player's choices can be, Gaster will be that parallel to how searching so hard for secrets can leave you numb to the game you once had an emotional attachment to. And that's what I believe will happen in the meta narrative. Only when you seek it out will you be left with it on full display. And that's Deltarune! We predicted everything that would happen based off of my own theories, as well as some of the famous community theories that I personally believe in. Like I said at the start of this video, I believe that at least one of the theories that the community has made in the past 3.5 years will be coming up in Deltarune eventually. With the sheer number of theories and the sheer variety of all of them, one of them has to stand the test of time. So why don't I take this time to highlight some of the theorists out there that I didn't get to talk about in this video. So first, shout out to Andrew Cunningham. He delves more into the analysis of Deltarune than actual specific theories, but it's all really good stuff and highly well made. Jaru J, even though I mentioned very little about, you should still check out their channel. He has some amazing and fun theories that are more unorthodox approach to Deltarune. Of course, you got MollyStars with their device theory. If you want a theory delving more into the meta narrative and the connection that Gaster established, then definitely go check them out. Snarlinger is a pretty small channel and relatively new, but makes some really fun and well-edited videos talking about the Deltarune community, as well as making some of their own theories on the game itself. You got Dorked, of course, who has been making so many Deltarune theories ever since, well, forever. So giving their channels a watch is definitely a must if you're as Deltarune pilled as I am. And lastly, to check out all the other theorists that I mentioned prior in the video, which will all be linked in the description below, along with the shoutouts that I just mentioned. And honestly, I'm just excited for Deltarune. It's going to be so surreal actually playing chapters 3 and 4. It will literally feel like a dream come true. I know that this isn't the typical content that I make, you know, over a 1-hour video about Deltarune. That's not really in my ballpark. But hey, if you guys like it, then I'm down to do another video about Deltarune in the future. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Adios and bye-bye.